Hi everyone, Jon Friedberg here with another episode of Stacking Chips, your strategy source for the 2007 World Series of Poker, Bellagio Cup, and the dozens of other events going on here in lovely Las Vegas. I'm a little under the weather today, as you can probably hear in my voice. I had all these great plans to come in here and talk about my experience at the final table and the key hands and decisions that I made that led up to my ability to advance to the final table. But unfortunately, I just don't want to overextend my voice today, so I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I have a great guest on today. He and I are going to talk about post-flop play, because I consider him to be one of the best post-flop players out there, especially in the online world. And he also has had a pretty good transition into the live arena as well. So that being said, I'm going to bring out my guest today, Kevin BelowAbove Saul. Kevin, thanks a lot for coming on the show, man. It's glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Jon.
So you have a huge online following. You're one of the most successful online players in the world. Certainly one of the most popular. And you're out here this year for your second World Series. Last year didn't go quite as well as you would have hoped, but you're obviously looking for a big smash this year. So tell us a little bit about your transition into live poker, maybe some background on your online poker, and what your plans are for this year in the World Series.
Well, it's actually my third World Series.
Oh, okay.
My first series, I only played like 3 preliminary events. I bubbled a 5K event, and that was when I was playing with my whole bankroll and play. Last year, I think I went like 0 for 18 events and 0 for every preliminary event that I played. I didn't have a single cash, and then I finally cashed in the Bellagio Cup main event. But pretty much how I ran last summer was I ran kings and aces like in 7 tournaments, and then in the Bellagio Cup main event we were coming down like 10 from the money. We were about to go from 9-handed tables to 6-handed, and at 1,000, 2,000 for a 200,000 chip pot, leaving me with 20,000 chips. I ran aces into kings, and the guy spiked a king on the turn. So that was basically, that summed up my summer, and I somehow just survived to the money, and I was up and down, and I got a few chips, but I never lasted, and I busted late that night. But then I went out to Foxwoods, and I had a couple final tables. I had a second place finish in a $2,000 event, and I had the next event I played was a $3,000 event, which I finished 4th, but I should have gotten at least heads up with JC Tran, but I gave him the tournament twice. So.
Right, and you cashed for about 150,000 combined with those two, right?
The second place was like 100,000, and the third place I think was around 50. But the third place I felt like I left like at least 70 or 80,000 on the table, because I should have been heads up with JC, and anything can happen heads up, and we all know that he just wins everything. And I have a ton of respect for his game, but would have liked to at least have the chance to try and get my chips in heads up first.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, what are your plans for the World Series this year?
Well, I'm doing things different than I did last year. Last year, I would play the preliminary event, and then I would bust out of that, and I'd come over to the Bellagio, and I'd play the 1K here, and I'd bust out of that, and I'd go back to the Rio and play the 500 there at 5 o'clock, and I'd bust out of that, and I'd come back to the Bellagio, and I'd play the 7 o'clock, and that's just my style. I just love to play. Online, I'm playing 8 to 10 games at a time, and I'm playing anything from like a $10 rebuy, $5 rebuy, to the 100 rebuy, the 1Ks on full tilt. It doesn't matter the buy-in. I just like to play. But and last year I was out here for the whole 2 months, and this year I'm just focusing on the World Series events. I might play a couple 5 o'clock events, but for the most part I'm playing the 12 o'clock events, and I'm only out here I'm out here through the 18th, and then I go home for 2 weeks. My best friend's getting married, and then I'm coming out for the last 1K rebuy in the main event. So I'm going to try and stay focused on just playing one thing a day and not having another option if I bust out, and trying to have complete concentration and focus on everything.
That sounds like a good plan, and certainly overextending yourself can bring negative things like my cold right now. I've been going a little crazy lately without sleep and too much poker and everything else. So I'm actually taking today off, which is another subject.
Well,
but
it's
anyway,
a good thing you had too much poker, because that meant
Well,
you made
yeah.
a final table. So I would die to have too much poker.
Right. Well, in that sense, it was good, but it was I think it was my 4th day of tournaments in a row.
Yeah.
Before making it to day 2 and then day 3, and the excitement and adrenaline levels get so high, as making it deep in tournaments, that it's hard to sleep and it's hard to eat well, and my body just sort of gave out on me. But
well, I just know that from railing you last year in the 1K.
Right. By the way, if in my episode on ESPN last year, Kevin was the one. They didn't play this audio clip at the on the ESPN coverage, but there was one hand where I was all in against Pomeroy with a pair of 8s on the flop of 7-9 Jack.
Versus
Kevin
Ace-9.
Versus Ace-9.
Nice
I don't
call.
know how he calls all his chips with
Nice
Ace-9.
call with Ace-9.
Anyway, there's like a 20-second pause before they put out the turn card, and I hear in the background Kevin, who's there sweating me, says, "No sweat, John. 10's coming on the turn."
10 ball.
Sure enough,
Wham.
10 ball on the turn, and
Shift
they didn't
the
even play that
bracelet
on
about an hour later.
Right.
No problem.
They didn't even play that on ESPN. But anyway, so back to our talk. So I think that's a good plan. I mean, I try not to get too much poker in during the World Series. I mean, it's hard with so many events right now to sort of pick and choose, but I like the idea of focusing on certain events and not feeling like there is a backup plan, because then it's almost an excuse for you to get a little too crazy with certain events.
I'd almost prefer to go play like a 10K event for the WPT at like Foxwoods. Not saying Foxwoods because that's where I run good, but I mean, at any other casino where they have 4 or 5 preliminaries ahead of time, you're out there for 10 days, and then you're back home, and you're with your friends and your family, and you can relax. And I'm not like everyone else who like gets all excited about the World Series. And I don't care about the bracelet or the money. I just want to win, and I like putting people on tilt as I win. So
you're definitely known for that.
Well, I did it yesterday.
Did you?
Yeah. Well, in the first level, I put a pretty bad beat. There was a chronic limper at 25.50, and he limped under the gun plus 2. I made 200 with 4-8 of hearts, and I'd chipped up to about 5,000 at this point. Guy to my left, who I'd been talking to, and he was another online player, and he smooth called me. David Williams called on the butt, and then the limper called, and I led a 8-8 deuce flop with 2 clubs and a heart, or I'm sorry, an 8 deuce deuce flop. I had top pair, I didn't flop trips. With 1 heart and 2 clubs, so I flopped top pair with the flush draw, my 8-4 of hearts. And I led for 350, and this guy made it like 800 pretty quick. And I kind of thought he had like somewhere between like 6s and 10s, jacks. I thought he'd fold if I shoved, so folds back to me, and I like immediately shoved. And he's like, I call. He's like, do you have aces? I'm like, no. And he flips over 2 kings, and I flipped over my 8-4 of hearts. And I said, well, I guess I'm going to need some hearts. And 6 of hearts came on the turn, and you just saw this guy just get the sick feeling in his stomach. Don't do it, dealer. 5 of hearts on the river. So he was out, and he told me that I better use the chip, put the chips to good use, which I didn't. And he shook my hand, and as he shook my hand, he said, I really don't appreciate the beat, man. So that was like my funniest story of the World Series so far.
So another success story for Kevin BelowAbove Saul.
Getting my money in bad and actually running decent.
And tilting the player that he's up against. So I consider you to be one of the most feared post-flop players, certainly in the online world, and I presume you have a similar game when you play live. So you like to see a lot of flops. You like to call raises with mediocre hands and even some bad hands in position, knowing that you can outplay your opponents a lot of the time. So tell us a little bit about your post-flop strategy and sort of how you execute your game.
Well, I mean, sometimes I'll just find a spot at the table that's really weak, and he or she is probably the only player who's going to get me to call their raise with like a mediocre hand like 10-3 offsuit. But I use smooth call a lot pre-flop. I don't like to build big pots. I like to chip up with no showdown, small pots. But like I'll smooth call with like pocket 5s, pocket 6s. I'll smooth call with an 8-9 suited. I'll smooth call with ace-king. I'll smooth call with aces or kings in position. Because if I have position on the hand, then I mean that your advantage is so great that your opponent just basically has to bail on the hand. unless they hit hard. So, and a lot of times, especially online, where I go somewhere and they know exactly who I am, and they probably hate me for putting a beat on them in a previous tournament. But it's not even, I wouldn't even say it's respect. I'd say it was more fear that people just stay away from me. And I find that more in the mid-range rebuys that I play, like the $10 and $20 rebuys. The $100 rebuys, I mean, it's just an all-out war. Like, no one stays away from anyone. You don't fear anyone, because you're not going to survive playing that tournament if you fear people.
Well, that tournament is known to be like the most stacked of any tournament online, right? The PokerStars $100 rebuy?
By far, I think it's the toughest tournament that I play on a regular basis that I've ever played, live or online. And that's including, I've played 6 or 7 different 10K events this year. And the field and the 10K events don't even compare to, like, sometimes you can be at a table with, like, 4 or 5 different players ranked in the top 15 or 20. And it's just, everyone has different little things, and you constantly have to change up your game. And it's part of the fun of the game.
Yeah, it's a tough tough tournament. Probably why I've never done well in it myself.
Personally, I don't know if I would still be playing poker if, like, the same thing worked every time and you didn't have to change anything. What fun is that?
Yeah.
Part of poker, part of it is the fun is winning, but part of the fun is looking at hands, changing your game, changing betting patterns, making your opponents think, and it's like a chess match.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in your post-flop play, you say you like to pick a couple of weak players, and so are you saying that you just, you'll call a raise with basically any two, knowing that if they miss a flop, or maybe they're going to continuation bet on the flop, but if they're not strong, they're going to slow down on the turn, and then you fireball it on the turn or the river, and they give up their hand?
I had perfect example. I had this guy. I was at a final table with a $20 rebuy. This player, he's a really good player. He finished 3rd in one of the F-Tops event. His name's DF Newbie, but I didn't know who he was at the time. But we were in a $20 rebuy. I was a chip leader. I was on his immediate left. Every time he raised pre-flop at the final table, I was just shipping it over him. And he had bled from like 500,000 to like 250,000 or something. And he doubles up, so he's got like 600,000. And I have like 1.2 million. And I keep on re-raising this guy pre-flop. So I decided that before he doubled up, I decided that I was going to lay off him because he just didn't have enough chips for me to, when he raised, he was going to have to be committed because the blinds were 15 and 30 or 10 and 20 or whatever. So he doubled up, and I was like, sweet, I can start picking on him again. So I decided that I was just going to, instead of doing it all pre-flop, I was going to let him see a flop first. So he had called a raise, or I called a raise in position. I think he'd raised in the cutoff, and I called on the button, or we were one off the button. And I called with 8-3 offsuit. And he had made it, I think the blinds were 15 and 30. He made it 90,000, and I called. And the flop came down 10-8-4. And he just shoved all in for like 530,000. I actually took my time bank for like 30 seconds because my plan was he was going to bet like 120,000. If it was like a rag flop like this, I was just going to ship it on him, and he wasn't going to be able to call unless he had an overpair. And he kind of took that plan away from me by shipping it all in. And I was like, wow, the only thing I felt like I was losing to was pocket nines. So after like 30 seconds, I finally called him, and he flipped over ace-king, and everyone was kind of, most people who know me weren't too shocked to see me flip over the 8-3 offsuit. But he bricked out, and it made the forums on 2+2, and I thought it was just an example. Like, I felt like he was a weak spot at the table. Now knowing a little bit more about him and watching him in the F-Tops event, I know he was probably one of 2 other really good players at the final table, and the rest of them were all weak spots. But I still probably would have played it the same way, just because of what I had going with him that night. But I generally don't call raises with like an 8-3 offsuit or a 10-3 offsuit. 8-3 suited maybe. 7-3 suited maybe. But I call these raises with no money invested, so I call them when I'm in the cutoff or I'm on the button, and when I have a lot of chips. I'm not making this call out of the big blind, protecting my big blind, and having to play the whole hand out of position, unless of course the small blind raises. But if like a middle position person raises, a lot of times, a big leak of mine was like I'd call like a 7-8 suited, and now late in tournaments I'm folding the 7-8 suited because it's not worth it to play it out of position. I'd rather call with no money invested on the button.
So what's the best way to play against you? I mean, if you're going to play a lot of hands, you're going to float a lot of flops, what's the best strategy to play against below above?
I don't even know.
Firing, I mean, shoving all in and hoping you don't have you don't flop something?
That's some kind of fear that some people, it's definitely fear that, this player DF newbie had shoved all into me, but I think the best thing is to try and minimize how many chips that you actually give me, and I'm not always going to have 7-8 suited. Occasionally I do wake up to a hand and I have like aces or kings, which people are like shocked. And in fact, I re-raised an online player yesterday in the 2K and I showed him 2 10s. And he's 2 10s, you're not allowed to have a hand like that, as he folded pre-flop. But that's kind of a joke. Like when I have a real hand, I'm not supposed to have a real hand ever because I play so many hands. But I go through stages. I've tightened my game up a little bit. It depends.
All right. So, are you playing in the short-handed or six-handed 1500 no limit today?
Yes, I am. I played the 2500 short-handed last year, and that was actually like my first short-handed experience. And we started with 2500 chips, and I got up to like 5,000 early. And right before the first break, I played a 10K pot with Ace King versus Ace 10, and I checked behind it on the turn on an ace-high board because I knew the guy would just push all in because he was doing it to everyone at the table, and a 10 hit at the river. He pushed all in. I called. He's doing it with or without the 10. So, but since then, Full Tilt's added the 6-hand max tournaments. Played a lot of those, and I've had a lot of success in final tables. And I'm really looking forward to this one. So
awesome. Well,
maybe I'll join you in that bracelet club.
I hope so, man. That would be fun. And I'll be there railing you for sure, like you were with me last year.
Well, that's why you got third this year, because I was in the 1K rebuy. I apologize.
Probably true. Well, hey, man, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Best of luck today in the 1500 six-handed event. And hopefully, I'm rooting for you, man. I'm not in the event, so I hope you do win the bracelet.
I hope so, too.
All right, everybody, that's it for today's episode of Stacking Chips. Tune in tomorrow and every day throughout the World Series for more strategy talk, interviews, and more right here on Card Player TV. And don't forget to email me your questions at stackingchips@cardplayer.com. From Jon Poker Chip Friedberg.
This is Kevin BelowAbove Saul.
We're out of here. Good luck, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.